Okay, welcome. LG, Aristo 2 Plus, Mike and Ashley and Savannah and Mark and Brittany and Kate and Autumn and Jeremiah and Sia, Magia and Pooja and Kaladan and 3383. This is actually our first regular webinar. This is different than the orientation in a big way. So let me tell you a few things that are different in a big way, and one will answer your question, Mark. And that is this one, unlike the regular, the orientation, this one is okay. It's not the best, but it's okay to watch this one, archived, and you don't need to submit any notes because this one is the one I'm going to give a secret word somewhere in the middle of the webinar. And all you have to do is, if you're watching this as an archive video, then somewhere in the webinar, you'll see the secret word and hear the secret word, and you just go to the secret word quiz and you type in the word. Okay, the only reason why you would need 5 pages of notes is if you don't do that by Sunday. If you don't do it by Sunday, then you got to give me 5 pages of notes. So the secret word quiz closes on Sunday, and then the only way to basically pass the class is to do 5 pages of notes for anyone you missed. So you do have to watch these, but you don't have to watch live, but live is going to be a lot more valuable to you guys in terms of learning than if you watch it archived and ask questions on the spot. So let me tell you what we're doing today. Okay, what we're doing is chapter 1 and 2. And I want to let you know, chapter 1 and 2, they're the easier of the chapters. That's one reason why I bulk them into 2 chapters. There's a lot of information, but none of the information is that difficult. That's the good news. Whereas some of the other chapters, you have 1 chapter for the whole week, and it's much harder than chapter 1 and 2 combined. So that's kind of how I break the class up, is I try to make sure that, I'm not killing you on any particular week. But there's going to be a lot of terminology, and I'm not going to be able to do all the terminology in the webinar. You are responsible for reading the book and watching the chapter video so that you get all the other details that I may not be able to get. Because again, I try to keep the webinar a little more than an hour, and if I did all the information, it would probably be 3 hours. And most people wouldn't like that, so I don't do that. So that's kind of the plan. What we're going to be talking about today is statistics, which is every day, I know. But specifically, we're going to be talking about how to conduct a survey and what are the details of conducting the survey. We're also going to be looking at how to use a spreadsheet and then look at the statistics, the basic statistics you get from the spreadsheet, and charts, and how to give a good presentation with charts. And that's the plan. So I want to open it up. Are there any other questions? And hopefully, Mark, I answered your question. Okay, if you didn't attend the orientation webinar, then that one is absolute 5 pages of notes. This one's different. And this one and all the rest of them are different. Orientation was special. So I want to make sure everyone comes to the orientation is the idea. Any questions? I'll open it up. Okay, if there's no questions, what I want to do, and I do this a lot in the webinars, is I want to bring in a current event. So see if you guys can tell me. And maybe you're out of it lately, last few days, but what is the thing going on right now in the news? And the hint is it's scary.
Oh, that guy just got killed in Iraq.
Yeah. So the whole thing with Iraq, and I don't know if you read the most recent news, and that is that Iran just struck back and took out, I guess, one of our bases in...
just about an hour ago.
Yeah, it just happened. That one we don't have any statistical studies on because it's only been an hour. But let me show you. And this is where I'm going to share my desktop. Where is it? This one, but I have to go to a different tab. Okay. So you should all see this, hopefully. And this is just a USA Today article. And again, this is one of the main reasons why I like teaching statistics, is it is very relevant to anything we're doing any day or any week. I can always pull up an article that uses what we're talking about. And in particular, this one does. So I want to go over a real world statistical example. This is about as real world as it gets. I can always grab whatever the newest news is, although the newest one is only an hour old and they don't have statistics on it yet. In fact, I haven't even read if there's casualties on.
Yeah, they don't even know all the information about it as of yet.
Yeah, I looked for that. I couldn't find any statistics on that one because they don't even know yet. They're just dealing. But they do know a little bit about the airstrike on, and if I pronounce, I don't know. I read, I don't watch. So if I pronounce their name wrong, it's Soleimani, maybe? Something like that. So Mark asked him, you can miss this webinar, watch the archived, and submit the secret word without doing the 5-page notes. The answer is yes, as long as you can do it by Sunday. So that's due on Sunday. So the secret word, and you have to do the secret word by Sunday, whether you watch the webinar, whether you're live or not live, you still have to go to the secret word quiz, by the way. I don't take roll on the regular webinars. I just do the secret word quiz. Okay, so let me explain what the article is. So I'm not gonna read the whole article because this is not a political science class. This is a statistics class. So I'm gonna read the important parts that we need. So 43% of Americans approve of Trump's airstrike of Soleimani. So I have a question for you. Is that true? Is exactly 43% of all Americans approve of the airstrike? What do you think?
No.
Do they know that?
No, you can't find that data.
They know, I'm teaching. Do they don't know that. Okay, sorry, people come to my office, sorry. So they don't know that. And in fact, I know they don't know that. How do I know personally they don't know that?
It hasn't been that long. It takes a while.
You can't
No. And my guess is all of you personally don't know they don't know that. Because they didn't ask me. And if they knew about all Americans, they know about me. Do you agree? So let me ask you. Did they ask any of you? Did you get a call from a survey company asking you? Probably not. Okay. In fact, in my 25 or so years of teaching stats, I have never had anyone say, "Yeah, they called me." They don't know. Okay. So here's the thing: the only true way to know the percent of all Americans that approve is to ask everybody. Okay. And why didn't they do that?
Wouldn't be possible to ask everybody.
Yeah, good luck. I mean, by the time they finished, it'd be so old news, no one would care anymore because we'd all be old. Okay?
There are also people without computers or phones, so.
Yeah, they can knock on the doors, they can find them. And so if they ask everyone, then there's a word for it. And the interesting thing, and it's kind of nice, is this word is in the Constitution of the United States of America. What do you call it when they ask everyone?
Census.
A census.
You've heard this word before. It's in the Constitution, not some fancy math word. No, should I tell you? Called a census. You've heard that word, right? So to ask everybody means that you are conducting a census, okay? And in the real world, for most things that you do, you cannot conduct a census. Do you all agree? So this is an example. It's just not possible to do it in a timely manner and get a census of all Americans on whether they approve of the airstrike. So you can't conduct a census. So the kind of the other side, if you can't do a census, what we do is called a sample. So a census means you ask everyone. A sample means you take a subset of the population and you survey. You get data from that subset. Any guess on how many people they asked? We'll see in a minute. Okay, 10,000. Any other guesses? My face-to-face class, actually, someone guessed it perfect. Brittany, you got it. Okay, so let me click. So by the way, it wasn't here. There we go. So notice that it says in the HuffPost YouGov survey, 30% of those surveyed say they strongly approve, etc. Most people do not click on that link because most people don't care that much about statistics. But we care because this class is called statistics. So I'm going to click on that link, and that's going to give us the details of the survey. And what's nice, what's good about this class, this is why I like this class so much, is that you're going to learn how to critically evaluate articles like this and see what the issues are. Did they do it right? Is it pretty accurate? Okay. Does that make sense? Just a minute, I'm reading in a private note. Yeah, so by the way, a question was asked about the 5 pages of notes. If you missed the orientation webinar, that was given on Sunday and Monday, so yesterday and the day before, then you must watch it archived, and you must take 5 pages of notes for that. If you missed this one live, you can watch it archived by Sunday, and you don't have to do notes. After Sunday, you have to. And the notes, by the way, you can take a picture of the notes and email them to me, that's fine. Or if you're like me and you type faster than you write, then you can type and email me a file. Either way. Okay, so let's look again at the details. So first thing, one of the things you'll notice, they asked a lot of questions, right? Do you approve or disapprove of the way Trump handled foreign policy? That's not the question we're looking at. Most surveys ask more than one question, especially when you're talking about paid surveys, because it costs too much money to only ask one. So it's much cheaper because they can sell this to, you know, as 10 different news articles or whatever instead of just one. So, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to go to the bottom. To the bottom of what we're talking about today. Getting there. And that's right here. All right. So the first thing, the population, U.S. citizens aged 18 and over. All right. Why 18 and over?
Voting age.
Yep, voting age.
You said voting age? Not quite, actually. That's a good guess, though. There's a reason. Okay, so here's the deal.
They're adults. They're considered their opinion matters.
They're adults, and it's not their, no, 17-year-olds' opinions matter too. Maybe you don't believe it, but I believe it. But here's the thing. If you ask a 17-year-old in a survey, a telephone survey, and you write it down, and that's all you do, you could actually get arrested for that. That's why.
Because they're
You have to get express written permission by both parents from every single under 18-year-old you ask, and it has to go through an ethics committee to be able to even do the survey. So that's miserable, and no one wants to do that. Do y'all agree? There's
Definitely.
one exception,
legally.
and the one exception is college students. So if a college student who's under 18 is at LTCC, our college, for example, we can ask them a survey question and not have to go through all the hoops. And I want to specifically tell you this because in Project One, which I'll be talking about next week, you're not allowed to ask under 18 people unless they're college students, because I don't want you to get arrested, and I don't want to get arrested. Sound fair? So don't even think about it. And in fact, I know at one point, it was a while back, I know someone asked high school kids at a high school once, and I know because my daughter came home when she was younger saying, "Guess what happened, Daddy?" That wasn't good. So please don't survey people under 18 unless they're college students, and then you're allowed to do that. Okay, so you don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get in trouble. Sound good? So I want to mention that since it's in this article, age 18 and over. All right, next. Respondents were selected from YouGov's opt-in internet panel. Are there any issues with an opt-in internet panel study?
Opt-in is you have to make a decision that you want to take it.
You gotta talk a little louder.
You have to make a decision that you want to take it.
Who do you have to? But what's the big issue? What's the problem with it? Remember, you're
Bias.
trying to find out how Americans feel. What's the
The
problem?
opt-in is usually going to be people that want their opinions expressed.
Yeah, and let me give you an example. Most of you might remember what happened about 3.5 years ago. What was the big news 3.5 years ago?
That's a really vague question.
It was the front page of articles 3.5 years ago. 3 years and 6 months, 5 months, and 4 months. Yeah, and what did it say in the front page? You say the election, but it said more than that. What was the detail?
Trump won.
They all said who was going to win?
Trump.
They all
No.
said Clinton was going to win.
Oh,
No,
you're
3.5
right.
years ago, not 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. Before
Right up to the election day, they said Clinton was going to win in a landslide.
Right, and here's the reason. The reason is opt-in. And it turns out that you end up with what's called voluntary response bias. And what that means is that because you're conducting a survey at which people choose whether or not to answer that survey question, there's going to be bias. And this particular one is an example where I'm pretty sure there's going to be bias. And the reason is it's not that different from do you like Clinton or Trump? Because it's the same kind of people. Do you see that? Because it's a Trump decision. So I look at this and I worry right away whether their article is accurate or not about saying that their survey is representative of Americans, because there is voluntary response bias. Got it? It's a big deal. It's very hard to deal with voluntary response bias. Okay, how can you do that? How can you not have voluntary response bias, at least in a bad way? What are the choices? What are the options? If you had to conduct the study, how would you conduct it to avoid voluntary response bias?
It would almost have to be completely random.
Still calling people, right? Okay,
Yeah.
you're still calling people. In fact, there's a good chance they did random dialing is what they call it, which means you pick random phone numbers and you call them. But you still have an opt-in issue or internet random stuff. Do you see that? So even if it was call or internet, either way, that's not going to be, you're not going to get random because of the voluntary response bias. So let me tell you a story, a personal story. And it was several years ago. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago. I got a call, and they said, if you answer our survey, we're going to give you if you come to our survey, then we're going to give you $100 and a free lunch, and it'll take 20 minutes. Do you know what I said?
Yep.
No.
Are you kidding? You think I'm that stupid? I said yes. Would you say no? No, that's the easiest $100 ever made. And almost everyone would say yes, right? And that's how you get rid of, that's one way of getting rid of voluntary response bias. Does that make sense? Is you pay people. And if you pay people, then they're going to do it, especially if you pay enough. Sometimes, depending on your population, you can do things without voluntary response bias. If you're going to want to survey students at a college, then the way you get rid of voluntary response bias is you have the instructor ask in class. And that's a social thing, is that if I ask you to fill out the survey right now, you probably would, because I told you, and it's kind of just the way things work. And that's a way to get rid of voluntary response bias. Sometimes there's no issue with voluntary response bias. So for example, I don't know if we have any biologists in the group right now, but if you wanted to find out how tall the trees are in the Sierra Nevadas, You want to find out the average height of trees in the Sierra Nevadas. First thing, could you do a census?
No.
No, you know how many trees there are in the
I'm
Sierra
about
Nevada
to
mountains?
say, yeah, you're gonna tell the trees to go get to one place. What?
You can't do a census. You can't measure every single tree in all the Sierra Nevadas. There's just too many of them. There's billions of them. Okay, but is there voluntary response bias? Any thoughts?
No.
No, of course not. If you go to a tree and you say, "Hey, can I measure how tall you are?" It's not going to say no. It's going to sit there.
If he
and
does,
measure how
he's
tall it is. Do you
worried.
see that? So voluntary response bias is for human studies. It's not for biological studies or, let's say, climate studies or anything that doesn't involve people. You don't have to worry about it. Okay, so there's all kinds of issues on sampling. So let me read a little more. Then they said a random sample. First thing, I don't believe them. Because a random sample means that every single person has exactly the same probability of being selected as every other person, and selected and answering the survey question. And because of voluntary response bias, we lose randomness. You understand that? So when I read this article, that's a problem right there, not random. Okay, it just isn't. The only way to do a random sample is literally you get everyone's name in all of America, and you put the names in a computer, you select those names, and by the way, good luck getting everyone's names in all of America. And then you go track every person down and make sure, usually with money, that they all answer your question. That's not what they did, I promise, because it's not possible. So that's a worry. If you ever use the word random when you're talking about a study with human subjects, worry a lot. You're almost certainly going to lose points on whatever you're doing because you can't do a random sample. Does that make sense? Okay. And in fact, we're going to play a little game. Let's see how you can do it. I want you to put in the chat box. Okay. And I'm going to count to 3, so you all do it at once, okay, to submit. You type it and then hit submit all at once so you're not looking at each other's. I want you to pick a random number, random whole number, from 1 to 4. Got it? Type in the chat box. Don't hit submit. I'm going to count to 3 and hit submit. Pick a random number from 1 to 4. Type it in the chat box. Got it? From 1 to 4. All right. 1, 2, 3, submit.
Oh, man, I don't know how to do that yet.
Okay. Now, if we really had a random number, there should be just as many 1s and 3s as there are 2s and 4s. Look what happened. Do you see it? I'm looking at the numbers. 422, 422, 44, and there's 1, 1. Does it look like you guys really did a random number? Do we have any psychology majors here?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a psychology thing. We do not have the ability to pick a random number out of our heads. And I'm not going to get into psychology, but we don't. So even that can't be done. Really, the only way to get a random number is to let a computer do it for us. And that does have the ability, by the way. Any questions on that? Okay, so worry about random. Now let's read some more. They said stratified by gender. So stratified sampling is the #1 sampling technique you will see done on human sampling. So also, you will see number of respondents 1,000. You see that right down there? All right, so stratified sampling has a step-by-step process. It's very specific. Step 1 is decide on the strata that you want to use. And that is based on what you think might cause biases if you don't have a good representation of that based on the groups. So one of the strata they decided that was important was gender. And so what they did, that's the first thing. You decide on that strata, you decided gender is important. Okay, because that might be really relevant to whether people think about whether the airstrike was good or not. So they wanted to make sure they had a proportionate amount of gender. Okay, so here's a question for you. We have 1,000 respondents. Should we ask 500 men and 500 women?
Mas jag vou try spark essa distância då.
What do you think? Should we ask 500 men and 500 women? Is that how you stratify by gender? 500 of each. Any thought? Okay, so the answer is no. And it has to do with the step-by-step process. Okay, again,
Det
step
skulle vara så
one,
maximum.
I'm going to mute a few of you if I can. I don't think I can in this mode, actually. But please mute yourself if you're talking to someone else. If you're talking to me, that's fine. But step number one is to identify the strata, and they've identified gender as one of the strata. Step number two is to do some research and find out what percentage of the population lies in each group. Okay, so for people, US citizens 18 and over, it's not 50-50. Did you know that? Okay, and by the way, sorry men, and that's me too, it's kind of depressing.
There are more women.
Yeah, anyone know why there's more women?
That's a good question.
We die young, because men die younger.
Also, it's because men make reckless decisions.
Yeah, you're badass. Well, I don't know about that, but no, it's because men die younger. That's the main reason. Okay, there's accidents. That's a small number. The main thing is
I was almost going to guess that it would.
Men tend to die a lot more than women.
I was going to guess that it's because men go to war.
What's that? Men go to war, but that's very rare actually. Much more common
but
is like heart attacks
die in
in
wars.
their 70s. So the percentage of men and women are not the same. There's a higher percent of women than there are of men. So you don't ask 500 of each. You find out the percent of each, and you can go online and find that out. And let's say there are 51% women, then you would ask 510 women, and you would ask 490 men, so that you have a proportionate number based on gender. Not an equal number, but a proportionate number. Does that make sense to all of you? Okay. Notice what they did. They also stratified by age. They stratified by race. They stratified by education and geographic region and voter registration. So they decided those were important pieces that could help avoid bias. Any questions on that? Okay, again, my big issue with this is opt-in. Opt-in has issues. But otherwise, stratified is a pretty good way of conducting a study. Any questions on that? Okay, so that's one main way of conducting a study, and that is using stratified sampling. Any questions so far? Okay, and it is the number one way of doing a scientific technique on surveying, especially people. All right, that's not the only way of deciding of doing a scientific study. So let me tell you another way. Let's suppose we wanted to survey, let's say you wanted to survey 300 Lake Tahoe Community College students. And we wanted it to be not that difficult to do, but we wanted it to be scientific. So what you would do in that case is you would use what's called cluster sampling. Okay, so cluster sampling also has a process. So for the process used for cluster sampling means that the first thing you do is you identify what the clusters are in your population. So what are the natural clusters for students at this college? And by the way, even if you live in San Diego, you're still a student at this college because you are in my class. Major, yeah, but that's going to be really hard to go find a whole lot of people that are English majors. That's an easy natural cluster. Full-time, also hard. Hard to go and look at someone and say, oh, that one's full-time. I could see he's got a smile on his face or something. Should I tell you? Do it by classes. Okay, you look at the classes. You go to think I have it right here. Yep. Good old schedule of classes. And we have, I don't know, hundreds of classes at our college. And what you do is you select a representative sample of classes. So you might pick maybe 2 online classes, maybe a couple face-to-face classes. You might, there's all kinds of classes you can pick. You might want to make sure you got some GE classes, maybe some recreational classes, so that it's representative of the college. Then you go to each class and have the instructor ask all of the students, every single one of them, in each of the classes that were chosen, and you have a study. And you've prevented a lot of bias. There's no voluntary response bias because instructors asking students, the student's just going to do it. You have representation because you've made sure your clusters are representative of the population. So it's actually a very nice way of doing it if you can. Any questions on that idea? Okay. There are, just because you do that or you think you can do that doesn't mean you can. There's always going to be bias. So for example, there is going to be a big group of students. I guarantee, even if you live in Lake Tahoe, you will not be able to survey. Any thoughts on what I might be talking about? No thoughts? Here's a hint. They're rapists, they're murderers, maybe robbed a bank, drug dealers.
Felons?
Yeah, we teach in the prisons. We have prison classes. So there are times you can't avoid bias. So if you ask this question about, do you agree with this airstrike, and all these prisoners, maybe they all agree, I don't know, then you're going to have bias and you can't avoid it. And that happens sometimes. Does that make sense?
Bias because they're incarcerated?
Yep. We have something called the Incarcerated Student Program. And the only way you're going to, and I hope none of you ever have the opportunity to ask them, because that means you had to kill someone, because then you're in there.
Not necessarily. You could work there.
Yeah, it's still really hard to do a survey if you work there.
Yeah, no, it's not possible.
Yeah, even then you can't. But if you live there, and please don't live there, then it's possible.
Felons aren't even allowed to vote, aren't they?
Huh?
Felons
Allowed to vote. I know some states they are, some states they aren't. I'm not sure about our state.
I know the state of California is actually trying to get it passed to allow felons to vote.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm not sure about our law. I know there's some going and not going. Okay, so anyway, the point is there's always going to be some bias. So don't think you have no bias. Okay, you always have bias. Any questions on kind of the idea of sampling? Let me give you another example of a sampling technique. This happened in, it was about 6 years ago, I think. It was one of my former students. And my student owned a towel manufacturing plant in Nevada. He made towels for hotels. And he wanted to show his towels were better than the ones made in China. And he wanted to do a sample of his towels. And he got consulting from me, and I helped him out so he could have an unbiased sample of towels. First thing out there, is there a voluntary response issue? Any thoughts?
I think it would depend on who you're surveying.
You're testing the towels, sticking them in a washer to see if they tear up after 10 washings.
I don't see how there can be any.
There is no
bias.
voluntary response issue. Towels don't say, no, I'm not going to be done. That's not going to happen. So there's no voluntary response issue. You still want to do it right. So we did what's called systematic sampling. Okay, and what we did is we obtained every 100th towel that came off of his assembly line. And those are the ones we put in the washer so that we had an unbiased sample. If we just obtained like a stack of towels that were done today, the problem is the person who was working there might have been the really good worker, whereas tomorrow's worker may not have been as good. But if you do every 100th one, and that might be over weeks, then you're going to have a nice representative sample of towels. And that's called systematic sampling. So that means you're doing every nth one. Okay, so if you have 1,000 to look at and you want to do 100, you're going to do every 10th. And that's how you work that out. That works well if you can line up and order all the different things you've got. If you can't do that, forget it. But if you can order everything, then it works. Okay, any questions on that particular process? Okay, stratified again means it's step-by-step process. First, you select the strata. And in this case, the first one they selected was gender. Then you go and you go do some research, and you find out for each of the groups, men and women in this case, what are the percentage of men and what are the percentage of women. Then you multiply that percent by the total number that you want to sample. In this case, it was 1,000. So you multiply the 51% by 1,000, and you establish your quotas. And then that's how many you survey for each of the quotas, for each type. So that's, Pooja, does that make sense? It's a very specific process for stratified sampling. And that's how it's always done. Okay, so systematic sampling. And by the way, just to note, my rule is that as long as you're a student, if you ever have a statistics question, and that might be when you're in a university getting your final bit of degree and you got to do some research, I'm always happy to help you out in stats. No problem. Okay, if you're my former student and you have a business and you're not a student, but you just want to do this for your business to make money, any guess what I'm going to ask of you? Okay, not a percentage kind of money. I'm going to ask you to donate to a scholarship. And then I'll volunteer and I'll help you out. But then I'm going to ask you to donate to a scholarship. You get a tax deduction in your business. I feel good because I've helped out students. So just to note, that's for, forever, and well, until I die, obviously. I can't help you much then. But that's just a note. And so he actually donated over $2,000 to a scholarship at our college, which was nice. Okay, so anyhow, there's other techniques. There's one other I want to mention. The other one is, what if you just posted on Snapchat or Facebook or whatever your favorite, media is, and say, hey, friends, can you answer my survey question? And then, a bunch of your friends answered. Okay, that is called convenience sampling. And that just means you just ask whatever's easy. Yeah, it's inaccurate, but the better word, by the way, inaccurate is correct, but the word we use is biased. Okay, so that has a very high chance of being strongly biased. Because most people, again, this is a psychology thing, most people end up asking people like themselves. And then you're going to get a bunch of answers just like you would answer. And
Yeah, because they're friends on Facebook and they accept their friendship. It's like they're friends on Facebook, so they know each other in some way. So of course they hang out with people that they have the same type of beliefs and thoughts, kind of, and then that's what they do.
Yeah, and it's going to be biased. It's fun, but don't ever publish it for science or any kind of peer-reviewed article. It's a bad idea. Okay, and if you were doing this for a newspaper, a news publisher, then they won't like it because it's going to be wrong, and they're going to get embarrassed when you have wrong stuff. Okay, so that's the last one I want to talk about. Any questions on the different sampling techniques? Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to show you my spreadsheet, and I think I showed this to you last time, but I didn't do anything with it. Now I'm going to do something with it. We're going to I'm going to conduct a study. So the first thing is that the study we just looked at, the survey question, if you remember, was do you agree with the strike in Iraq that Trump did on the Iranians? And the answer, let's see if you can give me an answer. And you all might have different answers, but let's hear your answers. Type in the chat box. Okay, so notice that the answers are words. When the answers are words, we call it qualitative data. Yes, no is definitely a word. Does that make sense? Okay, that's okay, but if you can, it's better to have what's called quantitative data. The answers are numbers. And the reason is, if you have quantitative data, if you have a lot of numbers, then we could do lots of statistics based on those numbers. And statistics are numbers that you get from the data. And I'm going to go over that, but I'm going to ask you a survey. Sound good? So the survey I'm going to ask you is the following. So the question is, how far do you live from Lake Tahoe Community College? I'm going to give you a few numbers just in case you have no idea. So if you live at the Y, you're 4 miles. If you don't live in Lake Tahoe, you don't even know what I'm talking about, by the way. And you're also 4 miles if you live at State Line. And I'll let you guess. And again, you don't have to give me the exact answer. If you live in Los Angeles area, let's call it 500 miles. Okay, Sacramento, miles. So I want you to type in the numbers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type it into the spreadsheet. We got 300. We got 4, 3, 142. All right. Sarah definitely, who was it? Mike definitely did a Google search or something like that because no one knows her exact knowledge. 200, 233, 200. $150, 200. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there because I don't want to spend all day just typing the numbers in. Okay, so there's our data. Now, if we consider it the people here, then we just did a census because we got everyone. I think, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing we got everyone. If you're considering this, say, online statistics students, then we have a sample. So whether you have a census or a sample has to do with population. And let's consider this to be a sample. And I want to look at what we call the statistics for the sample. So I'm just going to go and kind of order what I'm reading. And this is a spreadsheet program. I program this. I'm a programmer also. And I hope you all know what the word minimum means. If you don't, speak now because I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Minimum was 3. Okay, mean. That doesn't mean evil, by the way. What's the kind of a layman's term for the word mean?
Middle.
Definitely not middle, but average. Average.
Oh.
Average. So mean means add them up and divide by the total. Okay, and the layman's term is average. Middle is different. We're going to get to middle also. And there's a specific term for the middle too. Okay, so that was 143.2. Any questions on that? Okay, sample variance I'm not going to spend much time on. It's not that interesting unless you're a mathematician, so I'm not going there. Sample standard deviation, that's a very important number. Okay, it's one of the most important numbers of this entire class. Okay, and you may have heard of it. I'm going to tell you that there is a formula for it. I'm going to say it fast. If I say it fast, means you don't need it. But I want to let you know it's 1 over the square root. It's the square root of x minus mu quantity squared all over m minus 1. And you don't have to know the formula because you have technology. Okay, here's what you do need to know is that the idea of the standard deviation, which is 99 about, rounded to the nearest whole number, is that the average of all the numbers you inputted. It's the average of all numbers I inputted is the 143.2. Does that make sense, Pooja? That's the mean. The standard deviation is pretty close to how far apart the numbers are from the mean. So the mean was about 143. So for example, 300 is around what, 157 from the mean. Do you see that? Okay, whereas 142 is only 1 away from the mean. Okay, it's not quite mathematically precise, but it's kind of the idea that if you look at how far the numbers are from the mean and you kind of average those out, that's kind of the standard deviation. So it tells you how spread out the values are. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? So let me give you an example.
I do have a question.
Uh-huh.
So we're using the same spreadsheet also for the project, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's why I'm
Okay,
doing
so
this one today. And I'll do calculator.
Okay. And so when we input all the numbers on column A, it will automatically give us the numbers as far as the mean, the median, and all that.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay,
So all you
perfect.
have to do is move your eyeballs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I tried to make it as easy as possible. Okay, and maybe it's not easy for you, but I tried to make it easy. The hardest part is when you first use it, you have to go to File, and then you have to go to Make a Copy. So if you ever use like Google Docs and stuff, when I share something, if I allow you to edit it, it means you're editing mine, and you could like destroy all the formulas by mistake. And besides that, if someone puts it in and then you put it in, you're taking theirs away and putting yours in, and then you're fighting. So if you do File, Make a Copy, I'm not going to do that because I don't want another copy. But if you do File, Make a Copy, then you now have it and it's yours. Does that make sense? And
Yes, thank you.
your data. Okay. So that standard deviation is essential. So let me give you an example of why you might care. Kind of my main goal in this class is to have a really good pass rate. And I don't know if you remember from the orientation. What do you need to pass this class? What percent?
$70?
70%. Okay. So if I told you last quarter, my last stats online class, my average was 74%. Did I succeed?
Yes.
Okay, the answer is maybe. It's a trick question. Okay, if I told you the average was 74% and I said the standard deviation was 1%, then I succeeded. Because then most people are within 1 of 74%. And that means they all passed. Do you see that? On the other hand, if the average was 74% and the standard deviation was 25%, that means that I have a whole lot of A's and I have a whole lot of F's. Do you see that? It's like half and half. And then I'm not feeling comfortable because I failed about half the class. Does that make sense? So if you only know the mean, you don't have enough information. But if you know the mean and the standard deviation, that helps a lot. Because then you get a sense of how spread out the data is also. Any questions on the standard deviation? Okay, the median. This you learned in probably 6th grade, which means some of you don't remember it at all, but some of you might. And you remember what the median is?
The middle.
Yeah, that's the middle. That one's the middle one. And it's either the middle value, or in this case, I don't think it's the middle value. Notice there are no middle values. It's the average of the two middle values if you have an even number of values. And notice we had 10 values here. So we have an even number of values, so that means the median is the average of the two middles. Any questions on it? It's like there's a tie for middle. Okay, if there's an odd number, it truly is the middle. Okay, the maximum, I assume you all know what that means. I'm not going to read this one next. I'm going to read Q1 next because it really goes better in order. Q1 stands for the first quartile. And just from basic English, when you think about the word quartile, what does that tell you?
Like the first section?
But how are we sectioning off?
The data?
In quarters. Y'all know what a quarter is, money-wise. What do you think the first quartile might be?
25%.
Yeah. So basically at or below that number is 25% of the data. Any questions on that? Okay, now I'm going to give you some really horrible news from me. Not so bad for you, but really horrible for me. And that is the Statistical Society of America is not in agreement on what the definition of quartile really is. And in particular, if you look at Google spreadsheet or Excel, and then if you use your TI-84 calculator, you're going to get different answers. Does that suck? So when I programmed this, I programmed it since I was using a spreadsheet. I programmed it using the spreadsheet formula instead of the calculator formula. And there's different formulas for the exact same statistics thing, and you get different numbers. Pain in the butt. So I will not test you on calculating a quartile. On the project, just use what the spreadsheet tells you. But you won't get, none of the homework problems ask you to find this specific quartile number, but you are responsible for knowing that the quartiles break things up into force, breaks the data into force. And the first quartile means about a fourth of it is below it. Any questions on that? All right, Q3, any guess? Now you might be able to guess what that is.
And be the third.
25%.
Yeah, it'd be the third quartile, or 75% is below that number. Okay, so those are quartiles. And by the way, most people do quartiles, but you could do any percent and call it a percentile. So let me kind of give you an example. When I took the SAT, okay, any of you take the SAT? Maybe? Okay, when I took the SAT, I got a 1,470 on my SAT. Okay, my daughter got 2,090 on her SAT. Who did better? I got a 1,470. She got a 2,090.
She
Who
did.
did better? Okay, you think she did, and here's the answer. I didn't give you enough information for you to know. Okay, obviously I'm older than my daughter. I hope you know that, right? I'm a lot older than my daughter. Okay, 25 years or so older than my daughter. Okay, maybe 28 years older. So it was a whole different era, and it was a different scoring system. Does that make sense? So you really can't tell from those numbers. But if I told you I was in the 94th percentile and she was in the 98th percentile, who did better?
She did.
Now you can say she did better, because now we have a comparison to how we did versus everyone else. So percentiles are really nice because the number itself gives you an indication of how you compare with everyone else. Okay? Okay, and by the way, she got into Berkeley because she had a high percentile. I didn't apply to Berkeley. I don't know if I would have gotten in or not. But she did better because she got a higher percentile, not because her score was higher, because it was a whole different era. Does that make sense? Okay, so those are important to look at. Some more important things. N, that's easy. Anyone guess what the N stands for, or N means? N is 10, that's a hint.
It's the amount of respondents.
Yeah, and in fact, we call it the sample size. So 10 people responded, that's the sample size. And we'll always use the letter N for that. Okay, that's always used. Okay, then there's some things that we don't talk about today. We'll do that another day. Confidence level, p-value, that's another week. We have a whole week on those things. Okay, but I do want to talk about z-score. Z-score tells you how many standard deviations a number is from the mean. Does that make sense? So for example, let's look at, who was it that lives 300 miles from here? Okay, that was Brittany. Let's calculate Brittany's z-score. And I want to let you know, do you see next to x value, it's got an 8? Do you see next to that what it says? Can you read that?
Yes.
Change this. All right. I'm typing 300 in because I'm interested in that high value. And all I have to do is hit enter and it'll just calculate the z-score. And by the way, the formula is x minus the mean, all divided by the standard deviation. Make sure you put parentheses if you're using a calculator. X minus the mean in parentheses divided by the standard deviation. It tells you how many standard deviations you are away from the mean. So just let you know, okay, in case I don't do this again, I probably will use this again in my face-to-face class Thursday. But the number that I've got there is not the number you want. The number you want is whatever's interesting for your study. So if you're doing project 1 and you use the number I've got in there, I'm going to take lots of points off. You should have an interesting number, and that might be the high number. So that tells you how many standard deviations you are from the mean. If you are more than 3 standard deviations from the mean in either direction, we call it a strong outlier. You've all probably heard the word outlier. Is that true? Anyone never heard the word outlier? Okay. So what does an outlier mean just in general? Not the mathematical definition. But someone want to chime in on what it means? Because Jeremiah, you said you haven't heard it before? Most people have heard the word. When you hear
Something
the word
like
outlier.
that stands alone.
What's that?
Something that stands alone.
Yeah, it stands alone. It's very far apart from everything else. Yeah. Okay, it says very far from the rest. Okay, so that's the idea definition of outlier, is far from the rest. But the mathematical definition of outlier is a z-score is bigger than 2 or less than -2. So we can actually test to find out if something's an outlier. So we can see that Brittany is not an outlier. You may feel like you live far away, but actually you're not. Okay, my guess is had Mark stayed on, he'd be an outlier. I think it was Mark, if I remember right. Any guess why?
Because he lived in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I don't know if you call it live. Do you call it live when you're in the military? He's in Afghanistan.
Resides.
Yeah, and if we put in, I don't know how far Afghanistan is, but it's thousands of miles from here. If you put in, say, 6,000 miles, we got a super z-score. Okay, this is gigantic. Okay, he's such an extreme outlier, it's ridiculous. Does that make sense? Okay, on the other hand, of the people who answered, 300 is not an outlier. Let's check 3. Let's check 3. So if we type in 3, that's negative 1.41 to etc. Is that an outlier? No, it's not. It's not an outlier. It's not that close to the mean, but it's not an outlier. It's nothing that would like raise a big red flag. Do you see that? Whereas Afghanistan would. That's someone that you say, man, that person's far. Do you see how that works? Okay, so very important to understand how all this stuff works. Okay, IQR is Q3 minus Q1. It's the range of the quartiles. And it stands for interquartile range. Mode. Mode you also learn probably in 5th grade or something like that. You know what mode is?
The most numbers you have?
Yeah, the most frequent answer. So 200, notice if you look at the numbers, 3 people said 200. Okay, so the mode was 200. Don't worry about any of this bottom stuff. Sum squared, skewness, and kurtosis we'll never touch in this class. But there were some requests from some other instructors who wanted it, so I put it in. Any questions on these statistics? These are called statistics. Any questions? IQR stands for interquartile range. and it is Q3 minus Q1. And what it tells you is a range of the middle 50% of your sample. So if, for example, if you're in business and you want to send an advertisement out, then that IQR is really important because that might be kind of your target audience for advertisement. Do you see how that might work? If you don't want to like focus on the highs or lows, you want to focus on just general people, the middle 50% is kind of general. Okay, I've scrolled up. Any questions on that? Okay, next I want to look at the histogram. Now let's look at pictures. The histogram is a type of bar chart. Bar charts are more general. Histograms must have quantitative variables. So we had a quantitative variable because you all answered a number and how far you lived. And what it tells you is the frequency of various groups that are all the same width. Any questions on that? So we could see here that we have a histogram, and we could see we kind of have a middle group that's high, and then kind of low groups on left and right. This isn't that far from what you might have heard as a bell curve. A bell curve is, in our class, is called a normal distribution. So this is not that far from being a normal distribution because it starts low, goes up, and then goes down. See how that works? So that's a histogram. Histograms are really good for deciding what the distribution is. If instead, I'm going to just throw some numbers in even though we don't have them, I want to show you what other histograms might look like. Let's suppose we had that one. So I added a bunch of numbers in so I could show you what other things would be. So now it doesn't start low, go high, and go down again. Now it's high and then it just keeps going down. Do you see that? If it does that, we call it skewed right because it goes down to the right. Do you see that? If it's a mirror image, any guess on what you call it? I'm hoping if this is skewed right, it was a mirror image. Any guess on what you call it? I hope you can all guess.
Skewed left.
Yeah, then it'd be called skewed left. Okay, I'm not going to do that. Hopefully you can get that. Okay, so if it's the exact opposite, it's skewed left. Let me give you another example. Let's throw in some more values. Let's take out some of these. One more. There we go, and let's put in some more. Okay, is that skewed left? Is it
No.
skewed right?
Nope.
Normal?
Yes.
Remember, normal starts low, goes high, and goes back down again. Is that what it's doing?
No.
No, it's none of those. The word for this one is called uniform. So uniform means everything's the same, right? That's why you wear a uniform in the military, because everyone's supposed to look the same, right? So uniform means that for every interval you look at, you're going to have the same height. Any questions on that? We're going to have a whole chapter on the uniform distribution, by the way. Not today, but another day, in a couple weeks. Any questions on those examples? Okay, so let me show you some other graphs. This is called a stem and leaf graph. Okay, and what this does, because I have big numbers, and let me get rid of, let's do this. We get rid of all those 300s, that's messing things up. And let's add some more numbers just for fun. And if I go to stats, stem and leaf. Okay, that's a little better. And it's ignoring the 3 digits because we're only doing 2 digits because we got tens place and ones places. And what this shows you, this is a histogram, but you get the numbers also. So you'll notice that we can see that there was one person that said 33 and one person that said 36 because we have a tens place of 3, and then from that, we have a 3 and a 6 for the ones. Any questions on how to read this plot, this diagram? Okay, for presentations, if you had to give a presentation, what are the problems with this diagram?
There's no title.
There's no title, but let's you could give a title.
It's hard to read for people that are afraid of numbers or don't know how it works.
Exactly. Most people don't even know what it is. You pop it up on a PowerPoint in your presentation, people are going to go, what the hell is that? Does that make sense? So unless someone really knows statistics, don't use this. Does that make sense? But if they know statistics, if they're educated well, then they can read this. By the way, the bottom part I put in there, that is if you're blind. So I wanted to make sure it was accessible to blind people. So you don't have to worry about it. Unless you are blind, then you need to worry about it because that'll be yours. But by law, I need to make sure that everything's accessible. So whether you're blind or hearing impaired or whatever, the class can still work for you. So most of you don't have to worry about it, all those words. Any questions on the stem and leaf plot? Let me show you the next one. If I go to stats, then I go to box plot. Okay, this is called a box plot, and this gives you what's called the 5-point summary. Sometimes it's called the 5-number summary. And what the 5 numbers it's giving are the minimum, the first quartile, the median, the third quartile, and the maximum. And it's a picture of those. The box itself, that's in red here, that is the interquartile range, because that goes from Q1 to Q3, first quartile to third quartile. The things above that and below that are called the whiskers, and they'll often call this a box and whiskers plot. So in terms of why this is real useful, is it's very easy visually to see the middle 50%. What you can't tell easily is whether this has any skewness. Is this a normal distribution? You just can't see that. Does that make sense? So Sarah says, isn't that plot usually horizontal? Okay, so the answer is, it's whatever you want it to be. Same thing with a histogram. You can make it horizontal, you can make it vertical. That's like, if you're making a presentation, that's art. That's not math. So whatever you feel is more artistic is what you should use. They typically use the vertical ones if you have a box and whiskers plot and you're doing a comparison of a bunch of things, then they'll use the vertical ones. They'll use the horizontal ones for a single thing sometimes, but that's more artistic stuff I'm not teaching. Is that okay? So either way, you can do horizontal or vertical. The main thing is you're supposed to understand how to read it. So if I asked you what percentile was 200, what would you think?
Fourth quartile?
I want a percentile. I want a number.
Oh.
What percentile was 200? Approximately. You're not going to be able to tell me exactly, but you could guess right. There's a lot of right answers. There's even more wrong answers. Any thought? Okay. Well, 200 is above 148, right?
Yeah, so
What percentile is 148?
looks like the third.
That's 75th percentile. So 200 might be like 80th percentile.
Yeah.
Do you see that? If you said 84th, that's fine too. But if you said 30th percentile, that's wrong. Do you see that? Because it's got to be above 75th percentile. Any questions on that? Okay, so those are box plots. There's a lot of other plots too. These are the 3 main ones I'm talking about. There's some that I expect you to have seen before, like pie charts. You've all seen pie charts, right? So I'm not going over that. But these are the important ones for this class that we're talking about. And you're going to have to do those in the project, for example. Any questions about any of these? Okay. Again, I can't give you every single possible detail in chapter 1 and 2. So I do require you to read through the chapter and watch those videos because there's a lot of information, but none of it's that hard. Do you agree? Especially if you have a spreadsheet or a calculator. All right. What I do want to give you, and I'm going to reshare. This is very important. That's going to be too big. 36 is good. Do it in red. And that is the secret word. Remember, I told you there's always going to be a secret word given in these webinars. So the secret word for this webinar is quantitative. Do you remember we talked about quantitative data? Because you can't get a histogram, you can't get a stem and leaf, you can't get a box plot unless you have quantitative data. Okay, you can't get a standard deviation without, or a mean without quantitative data. So quantitative data, if you can get it, is much better because you can get all that statistics and learn a whole lot about your sample because you can describe it statistically. So that's the secret word. And then between now and Sunday, please don't wait until after Sunday. You're going to write 5 pages on this. Go to the secret word quiz and put in the word quantitative. Got it? It's the easiest quiz you'll ever take in your life, hopefully. So don't forget to write it down so you don't have to remember. So I'm going to unshare because I don't like to show this too long. And in fact, let me just go back to here. And let me do a stop share. Okay, and it's 7:12. Again, I always try and make it in between 7 and 7:30. That's my goal. And we're pretty close to halfway. And then what I always do is I will open it up to questions. I don't take attendance because you now have the secret word. That's kind of the attendance of the class. And guessing the secret word is almost impossible. Do you agree? My guess is none of you would have guessed that secret word. And that's kind of how I do it. I make sure that it's a word that you're just not going to write down. It's some random word for the chapter. The next one, no, not Thursday. So we have one a week, except this week because we had the orientation, but we have one major webinar a week. And so that is a good question. So let me show you. I think it's important. I could tell you, but even better is I'm going to show you how to find the secret word webinar. I mean, not the secret word, the webinar time. So I'm going to go share my desktop again. That is that guy. So here's the course. Pretty soon the course homepage is going to be the module page because that's the main thing we're going to be doing from now on. I'll change it in a few days probably. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to week 2 because next week is week 2. And you will see it says webinar on chapter 3 and project 1, Monday at 6 p.m. So whichever week you want to find out when the webinar is, I always have it as typically the second link. Any questions on that? Okay, let me just check it. Okay, are there other questions?
I have a question on, I was like doing the homework and I don't know if maybe you covered this or if I just missed it, but there was a question on there that said the range rule of thumb. What does
I have
that
to see
mean?
the question. Yeah, I have to see a little context on that.
Okay, I'll get with you later on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that. That's probably something in the book. But there's a few different contexts you could have the range rule of thumb. Sometimes you say 1.5 times the interquartile range. And 1.5 times the interquartile range is where most of the data lies. Outside that, that's another definition of outlier. Sometimes you talk about two standard deviations from the mean. So it's probably one of those two things. It depends whether they gave you information about the quartiles or about the standard deviation. If they gave you information about the quartiles, then you find the interquartile range, Q3 minus Q1, and you multiply by 1.5. If you are given the standard deviation, then you multiply the standard deviation by 2, and that's on either direction, 2 up and 2 down, is how far the range typically is. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, a little bit. Probably like you said, review the book better.
Yeah, so I'd have to see the context of the question, but there's actually 2 kinds of range rule of thumbs, and those are the 2. And if I had the exact question, I can look at it and see what information you're given. But it's one of those 2 things. Okay, other questions? And I want to remind you, by the way, if you have a question about the class, post on the Q&A forum. Also, make sure, I would say by the end of this week, you have partners, project partners. You want to be starting right away because I'm going to be giving a Project 1 presentation on Monday. So if you already have partners, that'll help you in, now you have your group that you can talk to about, because on Monday, you're going to hear about how to do the project. And it's nice, it's really easy to get partners. Make sure you post on the Project 1 discussion forum. I noticed someone else put it in the Project 2 discussion forum. My guess is by mistake, because no one's going to be looking at that for another month. Any other questions? Okay, also, if you post by Wednesday, your initial post for the discussion assignments, I will take a look at them. I'll give you suggestions, but you got to look at my suggestions. If you don't fix it, then you still lose points. So I know most of you had a good post that I've already posted, but I had one that looked like it needed to be redone. Okay, and then look at other people's and see where mistakes might have happened so you can avoid that mistake too. So that's a good way of getting the discussions correct, at least your initial post.
If we already have a group, do you still want us to post on the Project 1 comment box?
Now, if you have a group of 3, hopefully, then you're good.
Okay.
Yeah. Make sure you have each other's contact information so that you can contact each other.
You.
Yeah. And then I'll talk a lot about the project next week. We have a really hard chapter next week, but there's not a lot to talk about. It's just hard. Sorry. So there's not too much to talk about in terms of the content, so I have time to talk about the project. What's hard about it is there's some math involved, and a lot of people don't like math. Any other questions? Okay, as I always mention, if you have no questions and you want to say goodnight, we can do that. If you have questions, please ask. So one or the other, you can say goodnight or and log off, of course, or you can ask questions, and I'll be happy to answer until there's no more questions. Okay, so have a good night, Pooja and Mike. All right, good night, Kate and Brittany. Good night, Kaladin. All right, good night, Jeremiah.
Okay, I'm done and everything. I just oh, I see you leave. Have a good night, sir.
All right, have a good night. And Tyler and Samidja, any questions before we say goodnight? You say goodnight, Samidja. Tyler, you good? Like you're the last one there. I don't hear from you, then I think I'll say goodnight and let you know. Don't forget the secret word is somewhere in the webinar. It's real obvious if you watch it. It'll be on YouTube soon. So if you're watching it archived, then obviously it's on YouTube. And have a good night. Don't forget to post any questions you have. And don't forget your first assignment's due on Thursday for your 2 posts that you have to do. And then lots of stuff due on Sunday. So, and I'll send out a reminder. So have a wonderful night. And thank you for coming, all of you.